Welcome to Glamorous Stories. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and turn on the bell for more. Sit tight and let's dive in. The sound of the sewing machine was the only music Elara Mendez knew. Its rhythmic hum filled the tiny apartment like a heartbeat of survival. Threads of crimson, sapphire, and gold scattered across the floor, remnants of sleepless nights and unpaid dreams. Her hands, calloused, trembling, beautiful in their defiance, guided the fabric through the needle. Her son, Mateo, slept on a small mattress nearby, his homework still spread open, a pencil fallen from his tired hand. Outside, the city of San Cielo pulsed with life, a place where yachts gleamed against the horizon while hungry children sold flowers by traffic lights. And in that same city, destiny was about to walk through Elara's door wearing a tailored suit and arrogance. Damian Volkov arrived without warning. He didn't knock. Men like him believed doors opened for them. His cologne entered first, rich and invasive, followed by the cold gleam of his cufflinks. Elara looked up from her work, eyes wary but polite. "Mr. Volkov," she said, her voice even. "You're early. The last gown isn't finished yet." He glanced around the cramped studio, his expression unreadable. "You did the impossible last night, Ms. Mendez," he said finally. 10 custom gowns, all flawless in less than 24 hours. You saved my company's reputation at the biggest fashion gala in San Cielo. Elara nodded once, exhausted but proud. "I only did what was promised. I take my work seriously." Damian's lips curved into something that might have been a smile, or a warning. "Serious women rarely go far without help. You could have charged triple. Yet here you are, still working out of this." His gaze swept the room as if the peeling paint offended him. She folded her hands. "This is my studio, Mr. Volkov. It's not much, but it's mine." He took a slow step closer, his shoes sinking slightly into the worn rug. "You're talented, Elara. Too talented to live like this. You could be designing for me permanently, head designer at Volkov Atelier." Her heart skipped. "That's a generous offer," she said cautiously. "Generous?" His tone turned soft, deliberate. "No, Elara. I'm offering you the world. Luxury, security, power. But I don't do charity." He paused, letting the silence stretch thin. "There's just one condition." Her shoulders stiffened. "Condition?" He leaned closer, voice low, almost intimate. "Be my second wife." For a moment, Elara didn't breathe. The air grew heavy, pressing against her chest. What did you say?" He smiled as if it were a harmless joke. "My wife knows nothing about my business life. She's there for the parties, the image. You could be the one behind the success. I'll take care of you, your son, everything. In return you'll be mine, discreetly of course." Elara stared at him. The hum of the city faded. Even the sewing machine seemed to hold its breath. Then she laughed, softly, incredulously. "You think I'd agree to that?" Damian's eyes darkened. "Don't be naive, Elara. Women like you don't get far without a man's favor. You're barely scraping by. I could change everything overnight." She rose to her feet, small against his towering frame but fierce in her stance. "You're right about one thing," she said quietly. "You could change everything, but not me." He tilted his head, studying her as though she were an unruly asset. "You're proud. Admirable but impractical. Pride doesn't pay rent, Miss Mendez. Or school fees." Her fingers trembled at her sides, but she didn't back down. "Neither does shame." For the first time, Damian's composure cracked. He exhaled sharply, as if her refusal were an insult he couldn't digest. "You'll regret this. When your lights go out and your child goes hungry, remember? Damian Volkov offered you a way out." Elara's eyes glistened, not with tears but defiance. "You mistake me for someone who fears darkness. I've lived in it long enough to see through men like you." He smirked, adjusting his cufflinks. "We'll see how long that courage lasts when reality bites." He turned to leave, his cologne lingering like arrogance in the air. Before he reached the door, her voice stopped him. "Mr. Volkov." He looked back, eyebrow raised. "One day," she said, her tone calm but cutting, "you'll wish you'd never spoken those words." Their eyes locked, a silent war of dignity versus dominance. He left without another word, the door clicking behind him like a final insult. Elara stood still for a long time, listening to the echo of his footsteps fading down the hallway. Her body trembled as adrenaline drained away. She pressed her palms against the table, steadying herself. The gown she had been sewing, a masterpiece in emerald silk, lay unfinished. Damian's company logo was still pinned to the tag. She tore it off and dropped it into the trash. Mateo stirred awake, rubbing his eyes. Mama? You're still working? She smiled faintly, softening. Not anymore, mi amor. I think it's time we start something new. He nodded sleepily and went back to his books. She watched him, her heart aching and swelling at once. He deserved a future built on dignity, not dependency. Later that night, as rain began to patter against the window, Elara took out her old sketchbook, the one she hadn't opened since before Mateo's father disappeared. Pages filled with forgotten dreams stared back at her. Designs bold and unapologetic. Colors fierce like rebellion. She whispered to herself, if he thinks I'll crawl back, he doesn't know me at all. Across town, Damian Volkov sat in his marble office, a glass of scotch in hand. His assistant spoke timidly from the doorway. Sir, the Mendez delivery saved the show. Everyone's talking about it online. Some are even asking for her designs. He sipped his drink, jaw tight. She'll come around. They always do. But in his reflection across the dark window pane, even he didn't look convinced. Somewhere deep inside, a flicker of unease sparked. A sense that this woman he had underestimated might one day become a storm he couldn't control. Elara meanwhile worked through the night, stitching together not just fabric but resolve. The insult that was meant to break her had instead become her blueprint for rebirth. When dawn broke over San Cielo, the first light caught on a new sketch pinned above her desk. A single phrase scrawled in the corner read, "Made by Elara. Built by dignity." And as the sun rose over the sea, a seamstress who had been offered humiliation chose her crown instead. The next morning, San Cielo awoke to sunlight glimmering off the ocean like shards of gold, but for Elara the world still felt heavy. The night's insult had left a bruise on her soul, but not the kind that weakened. It burned like a quiet forge shaping steel. Her son Mateo sat at their wobbly kitchen table, eating toast spread thin with butter, unaware that his mother had just refused a fortune. "Are we okay, Mama?" he asked, his brown eyes wide and earnest. Elara smiled softly. "We're always okay, Carino. As long as we have each other." He grinned, crumbs on his cheek. "Then we're rich." She laughed, light and fleeting, and ruffled his hair. In that moment she promised herself she would never let him feel the weight of the world that had just tried to crush her. Later that afternoon she walked to Volkov Atelier to collect her final payment. The reception area smelled of lilies and money, all glass walls and white marble floors. Damian's secretary, a tall woman in a fitted blazer, looked up as Elara entered. "Ms. Mendez," she said coolly, "Mr. Volkov isn't expecting you." "I'm here for my payment," Elara replied, standing straighter than her nerves wanted. The woman glanced toward the tinted office door at the end of the hall, then back at Elara with faint pity. "Wait here." Minutes passed. Then Damian emerged, phone in hand, voice smooth and commanding. "Yes, move the contract to Friday. No delays." When he noticed Elara, he ended the call but didn't smile. "I thought you'd changed your mind." "I came for my payment," she said evenly. He studied her face, trying to read it. "You really meant it last night, didn't you?" "Yes," she said simply. He chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. "You'll regret this, Elara. You could have had a penthouse, a team, a future secured. My future isn't for sale." He walked closer, lowering his voice. "You think pride feeds a child? I've seen women like you before. You'll come crawling back when your rent's due." Her heart pounded, but her voice didn't waver. "If survival means surrendering my self-respect, then I'd rather starve standing up than eat on my knees." A flicker of irritation passed over his face. "You talk like you're above me." "No," she said, stepping back. "Just beyond your reach." He laughed, cold, dismissive, and turned toward his assistant. "Pay her what's due, and make sure we never do business with her again." The secretary hesitated, glancing between them. Damian snapped, "Now." Elara took the envelope of cash without another word, though her hands trembled slightly. She didn't look back when she left, but as the doors closed behind her, she caught a reflection of herself in the mirrored glass, head high, eyes unbroken. Outside, the wind from the sea was strong enough to lift strands of her hair, tangling them around her face. The scent of salt and steel filled her lungs. She turned the corner and exhaled, letting the tension bleed away. For the first time in a long while, she smiled to herself, not because she had won, but because she hadn't lost her soul. That night, she sat by the window, the city lights flickering in the distance. Mateo slept again and Elara counted the remaining bills. They would barely cover rent. Food would be tight. But she had something more valuable now, a purpose. Her best friend Lucia called from across town. Elara, I heard what happened. Is it true? Damian Volkov offered to make you his second wife. Elara sighed. He offered to buy my silence and obedience. Same thing really? Lucia whistled softly. And you said no? Of course. Elara, do you realize what you just gave up? That man could have changed your life. I don't want my life changed by someone who doesn't respect it. Lucia was quiet for a moment, then said, You've got courage I'll never understand. So what now? Elara looked out the window, her reflection framed against the city lights. Now I build something that's mine. With my own name on it. Lucia chuckled. You sound like you're planning a revolution. Maybe I am, Elara said softly. Days turned into weeks. The city moved on, but whispers followed her, small, cutting things. Other designers avoided her, afraid to anger Volkov. Clients who once begged for her work suddenly found someone else. Elara understood the unspoken message. Damian's influence ran deep. Still she kept going. She sold dresses from her apartment, repaired uniforms, made alterations for the neighborhood. Sometimes late at night she'd glance at her empty order book and feel a pang of doubt. But then Matteo would leave a little note on her work table. I believe in you, Mama. One evening she found herself standing by the harbor, the sea glistening beneath a bruised sunset. The waves crashed against the pier and she whispered to them like old friends. He thinks I'll crawl back, she said quietly. But I'll rise instead. Behind her an old fisherman overheard. He smiled, his weathered face kind. The sea takes what kneels before it, Nina. But it gives to those who stand firm. She nodded, his words anchoring in her heart. The next morning she began sketching new designs, not gowns for the elite, but clothes for women like herself. Strong, resilient, unseen. She used scraps of discarded fabric from factory bins, mixing colors and textures in ways no designer dared. It wasn't luxury, it was rebellion stitched in thread. She took photos of her pieces on her old phone, uploading them under the tag #ElaraMade, hoping someone would notice. At first nothing. But then one photo, a bright patchwork jacket worn by Lucia, caught attention online. Comments poured in, who designed this? Where can I buy it? This looks sustainable and stylish. Elara stared at the screen stunned. For the first time her name wasn't whispered in pity, it was celebrated. Meanwhile, Damian sat in his glass tower, unaware that the woman he'd dismissed was quietly igniting a movement. His empire gleamed as always, but small cracks were beginning to show. Late payments, unhappy investors, murmurs in boardrooms. Yet he didn't notice. Men like Damian rarely saw the storm before it arrived. That night, as Elara folded another finished jacket, she felt something stir within her, a steady flame, patient but unstoppable. She thought of his words, you'll come crawling back when reality bites. And she whispered to the empty room, reality bit Damian, but I bit back. The city of San Cielo slept, unaware that in a tiny apartment above a laundromat, a revolution was taking shape. One seam, one stitch, one act of defiance at a time. Elara didn't need his empire. She was quietly building her own. Morning sunlight spilled across Elara's sewing table, painting the clutter of fabrics in gold and rose. The hum of the city outside mixed with the distant rhythm of the waves. It had been months since she last saw Damian Volkov, months since the day he tried to purchase her pride. And in those months, Elara Mendez had learned to build miracles from scraps. The small boutique she opened was wedged between a bakery and a bicycle repair shop, its sign hand-painted in bright coral letters, Elara Made. It wasn't much, just a single room, 2 mannequins and a second-hand sewing machine, but it was hers. The window displayed a dress stitched from recycled denim and lace, bold and defiant, a quiet protest against luxury built on exploitation. Lucia, ever the optimist and gossip, burst through the door that morning holding her phone. Elara, she gasped. You're viral again. That jacket you made from old upholstery fabric? It's all over the internet. Elara blinked. Viral. Yes. Look, #ElaraMade has over 20,000 posts. People are calling your designs revolutionary sustainability. Elara laughed softly, still half in disbelief. Revolutionary? It's just what I can afford. Exactly, Lucia said grinning. You turned survival into style. The world loves an underdog story. Elara smiled but stayed focused, her hands busy threading a needle. They can love it all they want as long as it feeds Matteo and pays the rent. As she worked, customers began trickling in, young women, students, even tourists. They asked about her process, her inspiration, her story. Elara never exaggerated. She told them the truth, that she once sewed in silence for the powerful, until she realized her hands could create her own freedom. Her humility only made them adore her more. That week, a local blogger featured her on an article titled, "The Seamstress Who Said No to Power." The headline caught fire across San Cielo's digital world. Overnight, she went from the woman who defied Volkov, to the designer redefining courage. Orders flooded her inbox. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. But for every admirer there was also resentment. Some industry elites mocked her. "Upcycled trash," one fashion critic wrote online. "She's sewing sympathy, not style." Elara read it, smiled and kept stitching. "Let them talk," she murmured. "Fabric doesn't care who doubts it, it just needs the right thread." By the end of the month, she hired 2 local women, widows who had lost everything during the factory layoffs. They worked side by side, laughter and gossip blending with the sound of sewing machines. It wasn't just a workshop, it was a sanctuary for dignity. One afternoon, while Elara was sketching a new line, Matteo burst into the shop, holding his tablet. "Mama, they're talking about you on TV." She frowned, wiping her hands. "What?" He turned the screen toward her. A glossy morning show host beamed at the camera. "From tailor to trailblazer. Meet Elara Mendez, the woman behind San Cielo's hottest new brand, Elara Made. Her story of resilience is inspiring women everywhere." Elara's heart thudded. She never imagined her name would reach beyond her street, let alone the airwaves. Lucia screamed, "You're famous. Do you realize what this means?" Elara smiled faintly. "It means we'll have to work faster." That night, she stayed up late in her boutique, the sound of rain pattering against the roof. She traced her fingers over the stacks of orders pinned to the wall. Each name represented not just a customer, but faith in her vision. But success also carried shadows. A message arrived in her inbox the next morning, unsigned but unmistakably venomous. "You think you're untouchable? Don't forget who made you. You owe everything to Volkov." Elara stared at it for a moment, then deleted it without reply. She'd spent too many years letting men define her worth. Not anymore. Meanwhile, across the city, Damian Volkov watched her rise from the glossy silence of his penthouse office. His assistant hovered nearby. "Sir, the board meeting is in 10 minutes. He didn't respond. His gaze was fixed on his tablet, where an article about Elara glowed. Her name, once an afterthought, now rivaled his in headlines. "She's making quite an impression," the assistant said cautiously. "Sustainability is trending. People admire her story." Damian's jaw tightened. Stories fade. Power doesn't. But even as he said it, a flicker of unease crossed his face. When he turned on the TV that evening, a reporter was saying, "Elara Mendez's designs represent a shift in the fashion world, a rebellion against exploitation." He changed the channel, annoyed. Yet the words lingered. A rebellion. Back in her boutique, Elara pinned the final piece of a new collection, a gown made entirely of recycled satin. It shimmered in the lamplight, elegant and defiant. Lucia walked in quietly behind her. "You're going to need security soon," she teased. Elara laughed. "Security? For a seamstress." "For a symbol," Lucia corrected. "You don't even see it yet. You've become hope for every woman who's been underestimated." Elara paused, her eyes softening. "Hope doesn't wear designer clothes, Lucia. It wears courage." She turned off the light and stepped outside. The sea breeze brushed against her face. For a moment she closed her eyes and listened, the waves, the traffic, the distant laughter. It all felt like a rhythm she'd been waiting to dance to. The next morning she found a handwritten letter slid under her boutique door. The paper smelled faintly of expensive cologne. "Congratulations, Elara. You've done well. But remember, success built on defiance doesn't last. The world belongs to men who make offers, not women who refuse them. DV." Her fingers clenched the paper, then released it. She tore it in half and tossed it in the trash. "The world doesn't belong to men like you anymore," she whispered. By evening, #ElaraMade had surpassed 500,000 tags. Influencers wore her clothes, celebrities ordered custom pieces. Investors began reaching out, asking if she'd expand. She didn't rush to answer. She wasn't chasing wealth, she was building legacy. That night, after tucking Matteo into bed, she sat by the window and opened her old sketchbook again. The first page still bore her handwriting from that dark night months ago. "Made by Elara. Built by dignity." She traced over the words and smiled. What began as defiance had grown into a movement. Her rebellion wasn't loud or violent, it was patient, stitched into fabric, woven into stories of women who refused to bow. And though she didn't know it yet, her rise was only the beginning of Damian Volkov's fall. Rain lashed against the glass walls of Volkov Enterprises, turning the skyline of San Cielo into a blur of gray and regret. Damian Volkov stood by his window, the city sprawled beneath him like a conquered kingdom, except it was no longer his. His reflection looked older than he remembered, tired eyes, thinning patience, and the faint shadow of fear that wealth could no longer disguise. He had built an empire on arrogance, but lately, it felt as if the foundation was beginning to crack. His assistant Andrew entered quietly holding a folder. "Sir, the investors are asking for another meeting. They're concerned about the lawsuits." Damian didn't turn around. "Handle it. Sir, with respect, we can't keep handling everything with statements. The factory labor violations are all over the news. And the environmental fines." Damian finally turned, his voice sharp. "I said handle it." Andrew flinched, then sighed. Elara Mendez was featured on Global Vogue this morning. They called her the face of ethical fashion. She's starting a collaboration with... "Enough," Damian snapped. "I don't care what that woman is doing." But he did. Every headline that mentioned her name was like a thorn in his pride. He had once offered her a place beneath him and she'd chosen to stand alone, and now, somehow, she stood higher. When the office emptied that evening, Damian poured himself a drink and opened his tablet. The screen lit up with articles. Elara Mendez challenges Volkov's luxury empire. From struggle to stardom, the designer who redefined dignity. His jaw tightened. He slammed the tablet shut and stared into his glass. "You were supposed to fade," he muttered. Across the city, Elara's boutique was glowing with laughter and warmth. The air smelled of fabric and coffee, the energy electric. Orders came from across the country now. Magazines requested interviews and investors wanted in. But Elara never forgot where it began. Her tiny apartment, the humiliation that turned to fire. Lucia read an article aloud, grinning. "Listen to this. Elara Mendez's rise is a mirror of resilience. She didn't just reject Damian Volkov, she rejected the old world he represented. Girl, they're calling you a revolution in heels." Elara smiled. "Revolutions are messy, Lucia. I'm just trying to make beauty out of scraps." Scraps or not, the whole city's watching. Meanwhile, Damian's world was crumbling. The rumors had started small. An anonymous exposé, whispers of corruption, unpaid workers speaking out. Then came the lawsuits, environmental violations, fraud investigations, even his wife's divorce papers delivered during a press conference. The empire he'd once ruled with an iron smile was collapsing piece by piece, and there was no one left to defend him. One morning he walked into the boardroom to find half the seats empty. His top executives had resigned overnight. His investors were pulling out. Andrew met him with pale worry. "Sir, the merger with Artico Designs fell through. They cited ethical incompatibility." Damian blinked. "Ethical?" Andrew hesitated. "They've joined Elara's foundation instead." For a moment, silence filled the room, thick and poisonous. Damian laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "So now she's stealing business from me too." Andrew swallowed. "She's not stealing, sir. She's leading." Damian's hand clenched around the glass conference table. "Get out." That night, the storm outside mirrored the one inside him. He sat alone in his penthouse, the city lights flickering like dying embers. He thought of the night he'd visited Elara's studio, the way she'd looked at him, unflinching. "You'll wish you'd never spoken those words," she'd said. He poured another drink, but the scotch burned like guilt. Somewhere beneath the layers of pride and denial, something small and human stirred, regret. The next morning he woke to chaos. News anchors' voices spilled from every screen. Volkov Enterprises under investigation for fraud. Wife of Damian Volkov files lawsuit, citing emotional abuse. Public protests against unethical fashion houses. His phone buzzed relentlessly. Angry shareholders, lawyers, reporters, even former allies who now wanted distance. Damian ignored them all. His world was dissolving faster than he could lie. At noon he called Andrew. "Set up a meeting with Elara Mendez." Andrew paused. "Sir, I don't think she'll agree to see you." "She'll see me," Damian said, his voice low. "She's not like the others." Andrew hesitated but obeyed. That afternoon, a message reached Elara's boutique. Lucia nearly dropped her coffee when she read it. He wants to meet you? Now. After everything? Elara didn't look up from her sewing. Of course he does. What will you say? That depends on whether he's coming to apologize or to offer another insult. When Damian arrived the next day, he wasn't the man who had once stood in her studio wearing arrogance like armor. He looked smaller somehow, his confidence cracked. The boutique was buzzing with customers, laughter, and music. Elara looked up from behind the counter, her hands steady, her posture regal. Elara, he said softly, as though tasting her name for the first time. Mr. Volkov, she replied without looking at him. He glanced around at her boutique, at the busy women, the stacks of fabrics, the customers admiring her work. You've done well. I had to, she said simply. He exhaled. I was wrong about you. Her eyes lifted to meet his. You were wrong about many things. I came to make amends, he said carefully. We could still. No, she interrupted, her tone calm but absolute. You came because you're falling and you thought I might cushion the fall. His jaw tightened. You think you've won, but this world is brutal. It'll turn on you too. Maybe, she said, but when it does I'll still have my name. He said nothing. The silence stretched between them, heavy with what might have been and what never should. Finally she turned away. Goodbye, Damian. He lingered at the door for a long moment, then walked out into the rain. As he stepped into the street, a gust of wind tore a billboard loose from across the avenue. It flapped wildly, catching his attention. His own face, once the emblem of success, was now faded and torn. Beside it, a new billboard gleamed, Elara Mendez radiant and strong beneath the words, built by respect, not riches. For the first time in years, Damian Volkov felt something he didn't recognize. Not anger. Not pride. Just loss, the quiet ache of knowing he had destroyed everything he once could have cherished. And somewhere behind him, through the hum of the city, came the faint sound of laughter and sewing machines. The music of a woman who had turned his insult into her empire. The sun hung low over San Cielo, casting a warm amber glow through the windows of Elara Made. Inside, the boutique buzzed with the soft hum of creativity, scissors snipping, fabric rustling, women laughing as they worked. The little shop had transformed into a thriving studio, a place where resilience was sewn into every stitch. Elara Mendez stood by the front window, watching the ocean glimmer in the distance, her reflection framed by racks of vibrant designs. Life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. Her latest collection, Reborn, had sold out within days, and fashion magazines were calling her the heartbeat of ethical couture. Her story was no longer about defiance, it was about legacy. Yet, despite the success, Elara remained grounded. Her mornings began with coffee and Mateo's laughter, her nights ended with the quiet hum of the sewing machine, a sound that reminded her where she came from. Lucia burst in that afternoon, waving her phone. Guess who's crawling back into the spotlight? Elara smiled faintly. If it's another influencer asking for free clothes, I'll scream. Lucia shook her head. Worse. Damian Volkov. He's giving interviews now, talking about redemption and new beginnings. She made air quotes dramatically. The man's trying to rebrand himself. Elara's hands paused mid-stitch. Rebrand? Lucia scrolled through the article. After personal and professional setbacks, Damian Volkov seeks to rebuild his empire, with integrity this time. She scoffed. Integrity? The man wouldn't recognize it if it bit him. Elara chuckled quietly, but inside, a ripple of unease stirred. She had buried that part of her life, his voice, his insult, the sting of his arrogance. She didn't want his shadow anywhere near her light. 2 days later she got a call. Her assistant, Marisol, answered. Elara made good afternoon. She listened for a few seconds, then blinked and covered the receiver. It's for you? He says it's Mr. Volkov. Elara's fingers froze. For a moment the world seemed to pause, the chatter, the music, even the air. Tell him I'm busy, she said flatly. Marisol nodded and relayed the message, but a few minutes later, a black luxury car pulled up outside the boutique. Damian Volkov stepped out, impeccably dressed as always, but this time there was something different about him. An absence of arrogance replaced by something like desperation. Lucia muttered under her breath, "Oh, this should be good," and discreetly moved to the back room. Elara looked up as the bell above the door chimed. "We're not accepting investors," she said before he could speak. "I'm not here for business," Damian replied quietly. "Then you're in the wrong place," she said, returning to her work. He stepped closer, his voice softer now. "Elara, I've been following your success. What you've built, it's extraordinary. She didn't look up. What I built, you mean? Alone. He nodded, accepting the jab. Yes, alone. But imagine what we could do together now. Her hands stopped moving. Slowly, she lifted her gaze, her expression unreadable. Together? He took a breath, rehearsed but trembling slightly. You've proven yourself. The industry loves you. Investors adore you. But you could be unstoppable with the right backing, with someone who understands power. I'm rebuilding Elara. I've changed. I want you to join me. Her lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. Join you? You mean save you again? His jaw tightened. I'm not asking for charity. No, she said evenly, you're asking for another transaction. He frowned. That's not fair. I'm offering a partnership, an equal one. You'd have creative control. We could merge my business influence with your vision. Together we could dominate the global market. Her voice was calm, but each word hit like a blade. And what would I be this time, Damian? Your partner? Or your second wife again? The question hung in the air, heavy and cold. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Elara stood, smoothing her apron. You once told me I'd come crawling back when reality bit. Well, reality did bite, but it wasn't me who fell. His eyes softened. Elara, I was a different man then. Exactly, she said. And I preferred you that way because at least then I knew what you were. He looked around her boutique, at the laughter, the warmth, the joy radiating from every corner. You've done well without me. But you could go further. Think about it, New York, Paris, Milan. You could have the world. Elara's expression was steady, her tone quiet but cutting. The world means nothing if I have to share it with someone who once tried to buy my soul. For a long moment, silence filled the space between them. Outside, the waves crashed faintly in the distance, the city humming with life that neither of them could control. Finally, Damian exhaled, the last of his pride leaving with the breath. I deserved that, he admitted. But I had to try. You're the only person who's ever looked at me and seen the truth. She tilted her head. Then let that truth free you, Damian. But don't drag it back here. He looked at her one last time, really looked. The woman before him wasn't the seamstress he had once patronized. She was power in human form, carved from every scar he'd helped inflict. He realized then that he hadn't just underestimated her. He'd created his own undoing. As he turned to leave, Elara spoke one final time. Damian. He stopped at the door, hope flickering briefly. I'm hosting a charity gala next week, she said calmly. It's for women who've been underestimated and silenced. You should come. He hesitated, surprised. You're inviting me? Her eyes met his, calm but glacial. I'm giving you front row seats to what dignity looks like when it stands on its own. He nodded slowly, unsure whether to feel grateful or condemned. I'll be there. After he left, Lucia rushed out from the back room. Elara. Why did you invite him? The man's poison. Elara smiled faintly, gathering her sketches. Because sometimes, Lucia, poison deserves to watch what it failed to kill. That night, as she closed up the boutique, she glanced out at the moonlit city. Her reflection stared back from the glass door, strong, composed, unshakable. Somewhere in that same city, Damian Volkov sat alone in his penthouse, haunted by the sound of her voice. He poured himself another drink, but it didn't go down smoothly. Her words echoed in his mind, I'm giving you front row seats to what dignity looks like. And though he didn't yet know what she planned, a part of him already feared that Elara's quiet revenge would not come in anger, but in grace so magnificent it would expose his ruin to the world. The night of the gala arrived bathed in gold. Chandeliers glimmered like captured stars, and violins filled the air with elegant melancholy. The event, hosted at the historic Mirador Hall overlooking San Cielo's oceanfront, was the talk of the city. Everyone who mattered, politicians, socialites, investors, influencers, had come to witness the woman who had become a phenomenon. Elara Mendez, in a gown of her own design, a river of silver silk and hand-stitched glass beads, stood at the entrance, greeting guests with poise that carried both humility and authority. The fabric shimmered with every step, reflecting the lights like armor made of moonlight. Her name had become a symbol, and tonight she intended to show the world why. Lucia hovered nearby, adjusting her earpiece and whispering updates. The press is here in full force. Half the board of Volkov Enterprises is inside. And guess who just walked in? Elara didn't need to ask. The shift in the room's energy told her. Conversations softened, camera flashes redirected, and a low murmur rippled through the crowd as Damian Volkov entered. He looked immaculate in a black tuxedo, every detail screaming old-world wealth, but there was something off, an unease beneath the polish. He scanned the room until his gaze found her. For a brief moment, time seemed to fold. He gave a small nod, the ghost of confidence flickering in his eyes, and approached. "Elara," he said, offering a cautious smile. "You look extraordinary." "Thank you," she replied, her tone calm but cool. "I designed it myself." "I can see that. You've built something remarkable here." "I built something honest," she corrected softly. "That's rarer than remarkable." He hesitated, then nodded as if accepting the quiet reprimand. "I wanted to thank you for inviting me. It means more than you know." Her expression didn't change. "It will mean even more when you see what the night's about." Before he could respond, a reporter approached. "Mr. Volkov, a photo of the two of you, please?" Elara turned slightly toward the camera, the faintest curve of a smile on her lips. Damian stood beside her, his posture rigid. The flash burst, capturing an image that would soon circulate across every news outlet. A disgraced king beside the queen he'd once dismissed. As the evening unfolded, guests mingled beneath glittering lights, sipping champagne and admiring the auction pieces. Elara's creations made from reclaimed materials, each symbolizing rebirth. The proceeds, as the banners declared, would fund Second Chance, a foundation supporting women entrepreneurs. Lucia approached Elara between speeches. "Everything's perfect. You've outdone yourself." Elara nodded, scanning the room. "Perfect isn't enough tonight. It needs to be remembered." When it was time for the main address, the host, a respected journalist, took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we celebrate strength, creativity, and redemption. But before we continue, our founder, Elara Mendez, has something to say." Applause erupted as Elara stepped onto the stage, the lights framing her like a story come to life. Damian, seated near the front, leaned forward, his expression curious, cautious. Elara took the microphone. Her voice was steady, her presence commanding. "Good evening. I want to tell you a story," she began. "A few years ago, I was just a seamstress in a small apartment by the docks. I worked nights sewing clothes I could never afford for people who never learned my name. One day, a man with power offered me an escape from poverty." A hush fell over the audience. Cameras clicked softly. "He told me," Elara continued, her eyes sweeping across the crowd, "that I could have wealth, comfort, and status, if I accepted to be his second wife." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Damian's face drained of color. "I refused," she said simply. "Not because I was strong, but because I knew that accepting meant surrendering my dignity. I walked away with nothing but my son's hand in mine. And I was told I'd regret it. That I'd come crawling back when the world reminded me of my place." The crowd was silent now, all eyes fixed on her. Even the violins had stilled. "But I didn't crawl back," she said, her voice rising. "I built my own place. From discarded fabric and forgotten dreams, I built something lasting, because no amount of money can buy self-respect. Tonight we're not celebrating wealth. We're celebrating every woman who chose dignity over desperation. Every woman who was told you can't, and whispered back, watch me." Applause began softly, then grew into thunder. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some with tears glistening. Damian sat motionless, his hands clasped, eyes fixed on her. The realization hit him like a wave. She hadn't invited him for reconciliation. She'd invited him for reflection. This was her victory, not over him, but over everything he represented. Elara smiled faintly and continued, "Tonight's proceeds will go to Second Chance, not Second Wife, a foundation for women who refuse to be defined by circumstance or men's offers. Because empowerment isn't given, it's reclaimed." Lucia, watching from the side, whispered to herself, "Brava mi reina." When the applause finally subsided, Elara's gaze swept the audience one last time. Her eyes lingered briefly on Damian's, not in triumph but in calm closure. She inclined her head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, not forgiveness. Then she turned away from the microphone. Reporters rushed forward, cameras flashing, guests rising to greet her. The noise swelled, but Damian couldn't hear any of it. He sat frozen as people surrounded her, shaking her hand, praising her speech, calling her an icon. He rose quietly, unnoticed, and slipped out through a side door into the night. Outside, the air was cool, carrying the scent of the ocean. He walked toward the cliffside where the lights of the city met the sea. The sound of applause still echoed faintly behind him. He looked back at the glowing windows of Mirador Hall, where Elara's world shimmered in gold and grace. The words she'd spoken replayed in his mind: I chose myself, and I thrived. He exhaled, the breath shaking slightly. For the first time in years he felt the weight of something heavier than pride: truth. Inside, Elara removed her microphone and joined Lucia, who handed her a glass of water. You think he got the message? Lucia asked, half smirking. Elara glanced toward the window, where the reflection of the sea shimmered against the glass. If he didn't, she said softly, then he never will. But I didn't say it for him. I said it for every woman who's ever been offered a cage and called it salvation. Lucia smiled, eyes glistening. You did more than say it. You made them feel it. Elara looked around the room, at the women laughing, networking, celebrating, and felt a quiet peace. The storm that had once defined her life had finally calmed. She didn't need vengeance. Her existence was the lesson. As the orchestra resumed playing and the gala continued, the cameras caught one final image that would circulate the next morning across every headline. Elara Mendez standing tall on the stage, smiling beneath the words projected behind her. Dignity is the finest design. San Cielo woke the next morning buzzing with headlines. Every news outlet, every gossip blog, every talk show replayed the same clip. The moment Elara Mendez stood on stage and turned a once humiliating offer into a declaration of empowerment. Her words, I chose myself, and I thrived, had gone viral across the globe. Women quoted her speech, businesses pledged to support her foundation, and hashtag second chance not second wife trended on every platform. Meanwhile, Damian Volkov's name burned for an entirely different reason. Elara Mendez exposes former employer's indecent offer. Damian Volkov, from mogul to moral lesson. When arrogance meets karma. His photo appeared beside hers in stark contrast. Hers radiant and powerful, his sullen and hollow-eyed. The world didn't forget easily, and the internet never forgave. In his penthouse, Damian sat alone at his marble kitchen island, a half-empty glass of scotch before him. The morning sun flooded the room, mocking him with its brightness. His phone buzzed endlessly, reporters, investors, even old friends trying to distance themselves. The final blow came in an email notification. Subject: termination of partnership. Body: effective immediately, the Volkov brand will be removed from all major retail platforms. He stared at the screen, numb. The empire he'd built, brick by brick, bribe by bribe, was gone. His wife had finalized their divorce, taking half of everything. His board had resigned. His name had become a cautionary tale. For the first time in years there was no one left to call, no one left to command. He stood, pacing through his empty apartment. The air felt heavier with every step. The portraits of him at galas and conferences lined the walls, but he barely recognized the man in them, the one who thought power meant ownership, who thought women were pawns. He poured another drink, though his hands shook slightly. His reflection caught in the glass wall overlooking the ocean. For a fleeting second he saw her, Elara, standing tall in her silver gown, voice steady, eyes fierce. The memory played like a cruel loop in his mind. He had once called her poor. Now she was priceless. Hours passed. The city moved on. Meanwhile, in a modest studio overlooking the same sea, Elara worked quietly. The gala's success had multiplied her reach overnight. Orders poured in, collaborations were proposed, and journalists begged for interviews. But she turned most of them down. Fame had never been her goal, it was simply the byproduct of surviving with grace. Lucia sat beside her, scrolling through headlines. They're calling you the Queen of Redemption. Vogue wants you for their cover. Netflix wants a documentary. Elara smiled faintly, her hands still busy sewing. Let them talk. I still have work to do. Lucia shook her head, half laughing, half in awe. You're unbelievable. The man who once tried to make you invisible is now drowning in your shadow. Elara's needle paused midair. I don't want him drowning, she said softly. I just wanted to stop sinking because of him. Lucia looked at her for a moment, then nodded. You did more than that, Elara. You taught an entire world how to swim. That evening, Elara took a walk along the coastline. The air was cool, the waves rhythmic, as if the sea itself whispered approval. Mateo ran ahead, collecting seashells, his laughter ringing through the twilight. For the first time in years she felt free, truly deeply free. She thought of all the nights she'd spent stitching clothes by candlelight, the insults she'd endured, the hunger she'd hidden behind pride. Every tear had been a seed, every insult a root. And now the woman she had become was the bloom. Across town, Damian walked the same coastline from the opposite end, his shoes crunching against gravel, his coat fluttering in the salty wind. He hadn't meant to end up there. It was as if some invisible thread had pulled him toward the sea, toward the place where everything had begun and ended. He paused near the cliff's edge, gazing out over the water. The billboard that once bore his name had been replaced by a massive ad for Elara Maid. Her face looked down at him from above, smiling, confident, luminous. Beneath it the tagline read, "Built by respect, not riches." The words cut deeper than any accusation. He whispered under his breath, "You were never the poor one." "I was." The wind swallowed his confession. The following week, a journalist requested an interview. Perhaps out of desperation or guilt, Damian agreed. The footage aired late at night. His face was drawn, his voice quieter than anyone had ever heard. "She was right," he said. "Elara Mendez didn't just refuse me. She refused what I stood for. Power without respect isn't power, it's rot. I didn't see that until it was too late." The interviewer asked, "If you could say one thing to her now, what would it be?" He hesitated, eyes glistening. "Thank you for showing me the cost of arrogance. I just wish I hadn't made you pay part of it." The clip went viral again, but this time not for sympathy, for irony. The mighty Damian Volkov, humbled by the very woman he tried to own. Elara saw the interview by accident while having coffee the next morning. She watched it silently, her face unreadable. Lucia glanced over her shoulder. "Are you sorry for him?" Elara took a slow sip, then set the cup down. "No. I just hope he finally learned the value of silence." She turned off the TV and went back to work. Weeks later, Damian's mansion went up for sale. His name disappeared from invitations, magazines, business circles. He lived quietly now, away from the spotlight, walking the same coastal streets where Elara's foundation banners fluttered proudly. Sometimes he would pass the window of an Elara Maid store and pause. Through the glass, he'd see mannequins dressed in fabrics that seemed to shimmer with life, each piece carrying her signature, "Made by Elara." He never went inside. He didn't need to. She had already given him what he deserved, not revenge but remembrance. Elara, for her part, never mentioned him again. To her, Damian was not an enemy. He was a chapter she had already closed. A man who had tried to buy her silence but ended up amplifying her voice. On the anniversary of her boutique's opening, she hosted a small gathering. Mateo stood beside her as she cut the ribbon for her new foundation headquarters, Second Chance, not Second Wife. The crowd cheered. Cameras flashed. When she spoke, her tone was warm, steady, unshakable. "This isn't about revenge," she told them. "It's about respect. About proving that no one's dignity should ever be treated like a bargain." Her words echoed through the hall like sunlight, gentle but illuminating. Far away, watching from his quiet apartment, Damian turned off the TV and sat in silence for a long while. Then, almost without realizing it, he smiled, a small, sad, grateful smile. He whispered again, barely audible, "You were never the poor one, Elara. You were the lesson." And in that simple truth, both their stories found peace, hers in triumph, his in regret. 2 years later, San Cielo had changed, and so had Elara Mendez. The coastal city that once shimmered only for the elite now glowed with a new kind of light, the steady burn of progress, compassion, and dreams rebuilt from ashes. Billboards that once sold luxury now told stories of resilience, and in the heart of it all stood Elara's newest creation, the Second Chance Foundation, a sanctuary for women determined to rewrite their narratives. The grand opening of its headquarters drew a crowd from across the nation. The building was a modern masterpiece, glass walls wrapped around lush gardens, its interior filled with workshops, classrooms, and studios. On the front sign, engraved in elegant steel letters, were the words, "Second Chance, not Second Wife." It became more than a foundation, it was a movement. Women from every walk of life, single mothers, widows, survivors, walked through its doors carrying pain and leaving with purpose. The air inside buzzed with life, the whirring of sewing machines, the soft chatter of women sharing stories, laughter echoing off walls that once knew silence. Elara walked the halls that morning, her heels clicking softly against the marble floors. She paused at every classroom watching the women at work. One was learning to tailor. Another was designing jewelry. In a corner, 2 young girls were sketching dresses with bright crayons. "Make the sleeves sparkle," one of them giggled. Elara smiled. "Sparkle comes from confidence, not glitter," she said gently, and they beamed up at her. Lucia appeared beside her, clipboard in hand and joy on her face. "It's official," she said. "The foundation has just received full international funding. And guess who's coming to speak at the Women's Forum next month?" Elara raised an eyebrow. You? Lucia laughed. You. Vogue calls you the voice of dignity. Can you believe it? Elara chuckled softly. The world has funny ways of naming things. I was just a woman trying to survive. Lucia leaned closer. That's exactly why they listen. As the day continued, the foundation hosted its first public event, a scholarship ceremony for young designers. The hall was filled with media, students, and sponsors. The energy was electric, the applause thunderous. When Elara took the stage, her words flowed not as rehearsed lines but as lived truth. When I started this journey, she said, her voice carrying through the hall, I was told that poverty was the absence of wealth. But I've learned that true poverty is the absence of respect, for others and for oneself. Tonight we celebrate not just design but dignity. Not charity but courage. Every woman here has sown a new destiny from the fabric of her pain. You are all proof that self-worth is the finest luxury. The crowd rose to their feet in a standing ovation. Cameras flashed, but Elara's eyes were drawn to the back of the room, where a familiar figure lingered quietly near the exit. Damian Volkov. He was thinner now, his once perfect posture softened by humility. The sharpness in his features had dulled into something gentler, almost fragile. He didn't try to approach her. He just stood there listening, his eyes filled with something that looked like quiet awe, or maybe repentance. When the ceremony ended, Elara made her way toward the back where the last guests were leaving. Damian waited until she was close enough, then bowed his head slightly. I didn't want to disturb your night, he said softly. I just wanted to see what you built. It's beautiful. Elara met his gaze, calm and steady. It was never about beauty, Damian. It was about rebuilding what arrogance tried to destroy. He nodded. I know. I see that now. I lost everything, money, reputation, power, and somehow, it's the best thing that ever happened to me. It made me human again. She studied him for a moment, searching for insincerity but found none. People don't change easily, she said finally. But they can learn. I learned from you, he admitted quietly. The day you said no. I thought it was pride. Now I understand it was strength. Elara gave a faint smile, not of affection but of closure. Then let that lesson guide the rest of your life. He exhaled, relief and sadness blending in his expression. You don't owe me forgiveness. I know, she said gently. And that's why I can give it. For the first time Damian smiled, not the polished smile of a mogul but a small, broken, grateful one. You've done what I never could, built something that outlasts your name. Elara looked around the hall filled with women laughing, talking, dreaming. No, she said. They built it. I just showed them the door. He nodded, understanding. Then, without another word, he turned and left, his footsteps fading into the sound of the sea beyond the glass walls. That night, Elara stood on the balcony of her foundation, the ocean stretching endlessly before her. The wind played with her hair as city lights shimmered below. Lucia joined her with 2 cups of coffee. You saw him, didn't you? Lucia asked. Yes, Elara said softly. And I think, for once, he saw me too. Lucia handed her a cup. You could have destroyed him, you know. But you didn't. Elara smiled faintly. I didn't need to. Life already did that. My victory was never his punishment, it was my peace. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the tide roll in. Then Elara glanced down at her phone. Matteo had sent a message, a photo of a scholarship award he'd won at school with a note that read, For you, Mama. For us. Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled through them. The boy who once slept beside her sewing table now stood on the brink of his own dreams. That, she realized, was the truest legacy of all, not fame or money but freedom born from integrity. In the distance, fireworks erupted from the city harbor, their colors reflected in the waves below. The foundation's sign glowed proudly in the dark, second chance, not second wife. Elara lifted her gaze to the stars and whispered to herself, Here's to every woman who refused to be second anything. The night breeze carried her words into the vastness of the sky, where they seemed to shimmer alongside the fireworks. Down by the shore, unseen, Damian stood for a moment, watching the lights above the foundation. He smiled faintly, then walked away into the quiet, the sound of waves washing away what was left of the man he once was. And in the heart of San Cielo, Elara's laughter echoed through the halls of her foundation, soft, strong and full of grace, the sound of a woman who had not only rewritten her story but given others the courage to start their own. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next story.